Dusk settles over the crumbling facade of Gracefield Academy, its towering stone walls cloaked in ivy, hidden behind rusted wrought-iron gates that creaked faintly in the wind. The last rays of sunlight bleed across the cracked courtyard as shadows stretch long over the forgotten grounds. A chill rides the breeze, carrying with it the faint, unsettling echoes of distant children's laughter, ghostly fractured, fading into silence. Once hailed as a beacon of discipline, structure, and redemption for troubled youth, Gracefield Academy stood as a towering monument to tradition. Behind its Gothic arches and stained glass windows, it promised second chances. But beneath the pristine uniforms, rigid rules, and holy sermons, something else festered, something no one dared confront. Between 1998 and 2002, 29 children disappeared from Gracefield Academy. One by one, boys and girls vanished without a trace. No bodies, no confessions, no explanations, just grief, fear, and a silence that wrapped around the town like a shroud. The school closed abruptly in 2003, its stone halls abandoned, its history quietly buried beneath layers of shame, unanswered questions, and whispered warnings. But its secrets, the ones locked behind rusted doors and stained chapel floors, remain. A weathered missing persons poster flutters in the wind, the images of bright-eyed children faded by rain and time. A Catholic rosary lies forgotten on the stone steps, its wooden beads cracked, the crucifix tarnished. Police search teams comb dense, fog-draped woods, their flashlights slicing through the undergrowth, their faces etched with quiet frustration and fear. The official reports offer no resolution. The case files gather dust. But the locals still talk of strange symbols etched in hidden corners, of late-night rituals cloaked in secrecy, of shadows that never seemed to belong to anyone. The disappearances stopped. The questions never did. Tonight, we peel back the layers of myth, denial, and institutional silence. We follow the paper trail, the frightened whispers, the fractured memories of those who lived through the nightmare. The story of Gracefield Academy didn't end when its gates closed. In many ways, it never ended at all. A sweeping drone shot glides over the rugged, forested hills of northern Vermont. The dense woodland stretches endlessly, broken only by winding, narrow roads that snake through the mist like forgotten veins. Fog clings low to the treetops, rolling over abandoned farmsteads and decaying stone walls, fragments of a past long left behind. Hidden deep within this isolated expanse sits Gracefield Academy. Its towering stone facade rises from the wilderness, like a Gothic relic frozen in time, grey and imposing against the muted greens of the forest. At first glance, it speaks of tradition, order, and old-world discipline, a sanctuary for troubled youth far from prying eyes. But its remote location, that was no accident. Out here, with miles of dense wilderness in every direction, it's easy to disappear, without a trace. Archival black and white photographs flicker onto the screen. Boys in starched, ill-fitting uniforms, standing shoulder to shoulder, faces stiff with unease. Stoic priests in long cassocks stare down the camera, their eyes unreadable, their posture rigid. In group photos, students kneel obediently before towering stone crosses and weathered church spires. The Vermont hills sprawling behind them like silent sentinels, founded in 1921 by the Congregation of the Cross. Conservative Catholic order. Gracefield was built on ideals of redemption through strict structure. Moral corrected photographs and brittle documents flicker onto the screen, offering glimpses of lives now defined by their absence. The missing children of Gracefield Academy, all aged between 11 and 16, shared more than their youth. They came from fractured homes, worn down by a system that had labeled them troubled, disposable, or beyond saving. Many were funneled into Gracefield through foster care placements or court-mandated programs, meant to rehabilitate the wayward instead. They vanished, leaving behind only questions. Emily Harper was 13 when she disappeared. Her file lists a history of truancy and petty theft, hallmarks of a child lost between group homes and broken promises. Her auburn hair and defiant blue eyes stare back from a grainy photo taken weeks before she vanished. Emily was last seen leaving detention, a routine punishment for backtalk assigned by one of the nuns. Witnesses say she was headed toward the chapel as twilight settled over the grounds. She never returned. Her belongings remained untouched in her dormitory. Her rosary was later found abandoned near the chapel's stone steps. Marcus Bell, 15, carried the heavy scars of his upbringing years, bouncing between juvenile facilities and foster placements. Tall for his age, quiet, withdrawn, Marcus joined a weekend hiking trip organized by the school. The dense Vermont woods swallowed him whole. Staff initially insisted he wandered off, a troubled boy running again. But the search yielded no trace, and the wilderness, though vast, offered no clues. His disappearance ignited rumors of something darker lurking beneath the academy's structured facade. Sofia Alvarez was 12, the youngest of the known victims. Records reveal a shy, bookish girl placed at Gracefield after behavioral incidents in public school, though her foster parents later described her as sensitive and overwhelmed, not violent. One autumn morning, her bed was found neatly made, her belongings in order, as if she had simply slipped away unnoticed. But those who knew Sophia doubted she'd ever wander off alone into the forests that terrified her. Her disappearance deepened the sense of unease that already gripped the academy. The adults entrusted with their care formed a web of authority, secrecy, and contradiction. At the center stood Father Adrian Vale, Gracefield's enigmatic headmaster. Stern, composed, and fiercely traditional, Vale was admired by donors and local clergy for his unwavering discipline. But within the academy walls, students described him as cold, distant, a man whose piercing gaze seemed to see through lies, yet offered little comfort. Whispers surrounded his late-night meetings with select staff, and though never accused directly, his presence lingered over every unsolved disappearance. Sister Miriam, a devout nun known for her rigid adherence to doctrine, oversaw student discipline. Some regarded her as a protector of morality. Others whispered of her involvement in archaic rituals masked as punishments. Former students spoke of candlelit ceremonies in the old chapel, of symbols carved into wooden pews, of silent cries that dissolved into the night. Then there was Henry Locke, the reclusive groundskeeper, a former soldier with deep knowledge of the surrounding forests. Locke was rarely seen outside his duties, maintaining the sprawling, overgrown campus. His quiet demeanor and connection to the untamed wilderness made him both an asset and, in the eyes of some, a suspect. It was said Locke could navigate the woods blindfolded, a skill that, in light of the disappearances, unsettled more than it reassured. Together, these figures formed the backbone of Gracefield, bound by duty, secrets, and an academy now forever shadowed by the missing. The first signs that something was terribly wrong at Gracefield Academy arrived quietly, like shadows creeping along. The edges of visions, subtle, easy to dismiss, until they couldn't be ignored any longer. At first, They were the kinds of oddities easily blamed on forgetfulness, pranks, or superstition. Doors locked the night before were found hanging ajar by morning, swaying slightly as though recently disturbed. Faint carvings, cryptic symbols, resembling twisted crosses or circular spirals, began appearing on the dormitory walls, etched into the old wood with unsettling precision. Teachers dismissed them as graffiti, relics of bored or rebellious students acting out. But for those living behind Gracefield's stone facade, a darker rumor began to circulate, a whisper shared under blankets in the dead of night. Scribbled in the margins of student journals, asterisk, the Hollow is watching. And when next, asterisk, it started. In earnest in the winter of 1998, with the disappearance of Emily Harper. She had been at Gracefield for barely 6 months, a sharp-tongued, restless girl whose defiance made her an easy target for disciplinary action. On the evening she vanished, Emily had been sent to detention standard punishment for arguing with Sister Miriam during evening prayers. The last confirmed sighting of her placed her near the chapel as dusk settled, her small frame silhouetted against the towering stained glass windows. Hours later, when bed checks were conducted, her bunk was empty, her belongings untouched. Her rosary was later found abandoned on the stone steps leading to the chapel, one of its wooden beads cracked, as if clenched too tightly. Authorities initially dismissed her disappearance as a runaway incident. After all, Emily had a history of fleeing foster homes and group placements, but those who knew her doubted the explanation. Emily had been making plans, talking about getting out the right way, finishing her term, earning her release. She wouldn't have left behind the few things that mattered to her: the worn photo of her younger brother, the necklace from her late mother, her journal. Yet despite the growing unease, the investigation was perfunctory at best. The Academy's remote location, its reputation as a strict but legitimate institution, and Emily's background as a troubled youth, all combined to ensure the case faded into the fog. But the sense of dread didn't. It deepened. By the spring of 1999, strange occurrences escalated. Animals from the surrounding wood, stray dogs, raccoons, even deer, began appearing near the grounds, their bodies mutilated in ways that couldn't be explained by natural predators. Broken limbs, precise incisions, symbols carved into flesh. The faculty claimed it was the work of vandals or wild animals, but fear swelled among the students. It wasn't just what they said, it was what they heard. Faint chanting carried on the wind at night, whispers echoing through the empty hallways, the unsettling sensation of eyes watching from the tree line. Then Marcus Bell vanished. 15 years old, guarded, quiet. Marcus wasn't the type to seek attention. He had joined a supervised hiking trip into the dense Vermont forest surrounding the Academy, a routine activity meant to instill discipline and endurance. Midway through the trek, Marcus lagged behind the group. The fog rolled in thicker than usual, swallowing visibility. By the time the others noticed, Marcus was gone. Search parties combed the woods for days, aided by police and local volunteers. But they found only his rosary, tangled in the branches near a ravine. Its beads, identical to Emily Harper's, stirred whispers among those who remembered. The official story again leaned toward the convenient explanation of runaway, another broken child escaping accountability. But those still within walls spoke quietly of a different narrative, one of cloaked figures spotted at the forest's edge, of candlelit processions vanishing into the mist, of symbols etched into trees along hidden paths. Some students swore they saw figures dressed in dark, Hooded robes moving through the woods at night, to organized, to coordinated to be dismissed as students sneaking out. The school administration tightened curfews, increased patrols, and insisted on normalcy. But the facade was cracking. Grainy, time-stamped security footage surface shared among students in hushed secrecy, showing shadowed hallways. Doors creaking open on their own, faint figures barely visible at the edges of the frame. Teachers called them glitches. Students called them warnings. One diary, confiscated from a senior student and later leaked by a former staff member, contained scrawled entries that sent shivers through the town when revealed years later. The handwriting was shaky, hurried, but clear enough to understand the terror behind the words. Asterisk, they say, the hollow only takes the ones no one will miss. They say if you hear them chanting, it's already too late. Emily's gone. Marcus is gone. We're next. Asterisk, the hollow, the whispered name for whatever force, ritual, or entity haunted Gracefield's crumbling halls. No one knew exactly what it meant. Some believed it referred to a secret society among staff, others to something older tied to the land, the chapel, the symbols hidden in plain sight. But whether folklore or fact, the disappearances and the dread were real. In 1999, Sofia Alvarez's bed was found untouched, her belongings neatly arranged, her dorm room door locked from the inside. No witnesses, no signs of struggle. Just another child swallowed whole by the growing darkness at Gracefield Academy. The pattern was undeniable, yet the silence from those in power persisted, and for those left behind, students trapped between fear and obedience, the message was clear. No one leaves Gracefield unless Gracefield allows it. The disappearances at Gracefield Academy, once dismissed as isolated tragedies or rebellious runaways, soon became impossible to ignore. By the year 2000, the number of missing children had climbed to 94 more students gone without a trace in less than 2 years. Their faces, once confined to forgotten files and fleeting conversations, now stared out from newspaper covers and primetime broadcasts. The small towns surrounding the isolated Vermont hills were thrust into a national spotlight they never wanted, as reporters, investigators, and frantic parents descended on Gracefield, demanding answers that the Academy seemed determined not to provide. Newspaper headlines screamed in bold, accusatory letters. Another child missing from elite Vermont boarding school. An asterisk, Gracefield Academy under scrutiny after series of vanishings. Beneath the sensational titles were grainy photographs of missing children, their young faces frozen in time, accompanied by heart-wrenching pleas from desperate families. The local sheriff's department held press conferences, their spokespeople reciting the same strained reassurances that every effort was being made, that there was no evidence of foul play, that these incidents, tragic as they were, did not indicate a larger pattern. But the residents of nearby towns and the families of the missing weren't buying it. In the quiet cafes, gas stations, and church basements of northern Vermont, whispers thickened into full-blown suspicion. Rumors swirled of dark rituals hidden behind the Academy's Gothic arches, of cult-like ceremonies conducted beneath the veil of Catholic tradition. The Congregation of the Cross, the religious order that founded Gracefield, became the center of growing paranoia, with residents questioning how such an institution could operate so remotely, so secretively, and with so little oversight. By the fall of 2000, protests erupted outside the Academy's Rotiran gates. Grieving parents, concerned locals, and student advocates stood in clusters beneath the towering stone walls. clutching signs that read asterisk, "Where are our children?" End the silence and shut down Gracefield. Candlelight vigils flickered through the nights, the soft glow of remembrance fighting against the encroaching shadows. For many, the vigils weren't just for mourning, they were acts of defiance. Reminders that those lost would not be forgotten, that silence would not be allowed to reign. Despite the growing pressure, the Academy's leadership remained largely unshaken, at least publicly. Father Adrian Vale, the enigmatic headmaster, finally broke his silence during a heavily attended press briefing outside the chapel steps. Flanked by stern-faced clergy and senior staff, Vale stood beneath the weathered stone cross and delivered a statement that only deepened the community's unease. "Gracefield Academy," he began, his voice calm yet carrying an unsettling undertone, "remains committed to guiding wayward youth toward salvation. But not all choose to accept the light offered to them. Some stray beyond redemption." His words, cryptic and cold, sent a ripple of horror through the gathered crowd. Reporters pressed for clarification, shouting questions about missing students, accountability, and allegations of misconduct. But Vale offered no further explanation, retreating behind the Academy's heavy doors as security ushered the public away. His statement was replayed across news channels, analyzed by psychologists, dissected by true crime enthusiasts, yet it offered no answers, only a chilling glimpse into the Academy's rigid, unforgiving philosophy. Among those seeking truth was local journalist Sarah Green, a lifelong Vermont resident turned investigative reporter for the Northeastern Voice. Archival footage shows her seated in a small newsroom, stacks of papers and case files spread across her desk, her eyes weary but determined. In interviews, Sarah recounted the impossible barriers she faced trying to expose the truth behind Gracefield. Something was wrong, she stated, her voice steady despite the weight of years-old frustration. The patterns, the missing kids, the secrecy, the conflicting reports, it all pointed to a deeper rot within that school. But every attempt to uncover it hit a wall of silence and fear. Sarah detailed how sources, both former staff and students, would initially agree to talk, only to back out at the last moment. Some claimed they were threatened. Others simply disappeared from public view. Official records were mysteriously incomplete, enrollment documents redacted and disciplinary, logs either missing or doctored beyond recognition. Even police reports seemed diluted, stripped of critical details that pointed to the Academy's internal failings. Still, beneath the Academy's stone walls and stained glass windows, the tension simmered. Students who remained at Gracefield lived under a growing cloud of paranoia. Whispers of the hollow, the ominous, undefined force said to stalk the grounds intensified, spreading beyond late-night dormitory tales into urgent, panicked conversations. Carvings in hidden corners multiplied. Spirals, twisted crosses, cryptic runes no one could trace to any official religious teaching. Some students reported seeing hooded figures along the forest's edge, their faces obscured, their presence unacknowledged by faculty. Meanwhile, strange occurrences plagued the nearby towns. Locals reported sightings of cloaked individuals moving through the woods, strange symbols appearing on barns and fences, livestock found mutilated in grotesque patterns that defied animal predation. Hunters and hikers spoke of distorted chants drifting through the trees, voices carried by the wind, dissolving into the fog before anyone could pinpoint their source. Despite mounting evidence of something deeply wrong, law enforcement found itself hamstrung. The Academy's affiliation with the Congregation of the Cross provided it with powerful allies in state and religious circles. Legal inquiries were delayed, investigations rerouted, and those who pushed too hard often found their careers quietly derailed. For families of the missing, frustration boiled into desperation. Grief-stricken mothers and fathers formed advocacy groups, lobbying for broader investigations and independent oversight. They circulated flyers, organized rallies, and pressed politicians to act. Yet each new effort seemed to collide with the same immovable obstacle, the institution's wall of silence. Bolstered by decades of tradition and the lingering fear of retribution, by the end of 2000, the Academy's reputation was irreparably stained. Yet its gates remained locked to outsiders, its secrets preserved within crumbling stone walls. More students vanished, though their cases grew increasingly buried beneath bureaucracy and misinformation. Those still inside Gracefield spoke cautiously, if at all, their eyes haunted. Their trust eroded, but outside the gates, the resolve to expose the truth only hardened. Parents, reporters, and townspeople understood. Now this wasn't a series of coincidences, nor the failures of individual children. It was something bigger, darker, hidden in plain sight behind the Academy's lofty promises of salvation and discipline. And for those watching from the shadows, cloaked in the safety of silence, it seemed, everything was going exactly as planned. October 2000 marked the moment when the unsettling rumors surrounding Gracefield Academy transformed into undeniable horror. Until then, the disappearances had been shrouded in ambiguity, plausible deniability. Cloaked each incident, bolstered by official narratives of runaways, isolated tragedies, and unfortunate coincidence. But all of that shattered when search teams stumbled upon the clearing deep within the Vermont wilderness, what would come to be known simply, chillingly, as the Hollow. The discovery came during yet another exhaustive search operation, launched after the most recent disappearance, 14-year-old boy named Daniel Whitlow. Like the others before him, Daniel's vanishing followed a familiar pattern. Last seen near the chapel. Personal belongings left behind, his absence dismissed. At first, as misbehavior before panic took hold. This time, however, the search extended farther into the forest than ever before. Locals, volunteers, state police, and even the National Guard combed the dense, fog-draped hills, driven by mounting outrage and the desperate pleas of Daniel's parents. It was a veteran game warden, leading a canine unit, who first stumbled upon the hidden clearing. The trees parted abruptly, revealing a natural depression in the earth, a remote hollow concealed by the overgrowth. The air was unnaturally still, heavy with a cloying metallic scent that made searchers' stomachs turn. At the center stood a crude stone altar, weathered by time yet unmistakably used for something recent. Its surface, darkened with what forensic teams later confirmed was blood. Surrounding the altar, symbols had been carved into the soil, and nearby tree trunks spirals, inverted crosses, and cryptic runes, eerily similar to those etched onto Gracefield's dormitory walls. No bodies were found in the hollow, but what the search teams did recover was haunting enough: shredded remnants of Gracefield Academy uniforms, tattered school badges, and fragments of rosary beads identical to those issued by the Academy. Scattered near the altar were small, personal items that investigators would later connect to several of the missing students. A broken hair clip, the corner of a photograph, the strap of a familiar backpack. Police cordoned off the area immediately, forensic teams flooding in beneath the spinning blades of news helicopters. Drone footage captured aerial shots of the clearing, the stone altar at its heart, encircled by the looming trees like silent sentinels. The images ignited a firestorm. of fear, speculation, and rage across Vermont and beyond. Yet, astonishingly, officials publicly downplayed the discovery. At a hastily organized press conference, a visibly strange sheriff described the scene as disturbing but inconclusive and dismissed connections to the academy. The blood, he claimed, could not be definitively linked to human remains. The symbols, asterisk, likely the work of pranksters or local occult enthusiasts. When pressed on the fragments of uniforms, the response was equally deflective asterisk. No evidence suggests criminal activity. At this time, we consider this a deranged prank, asterisk. The backlash was immediate and ferocious. Protesters returned to Gracefield's gates, their numbers doubled, their anger boiling over. Candlelight vigils gave way to marches, chants of asterisk. Where are our children? Echoing through the hills. National news outlets descended on the town, true crime programs airing specials dissecting every detail of the Hollow. Conspiracy theorists flooding the airwaves with claims of cults, government cover-ups, and ancient rituals. Parents of the missing were outraged, accusing authorities of incompetence or worse, complicity. Asterisk, you can't dismiss this as a prank. Asterisk, shouted Daniel Whitlow's mother at a televised rally, tears streaking down her face. Asterisk, my son is gone. And now there's an altar in the woods, covered in blood and pieces of our children's lives. How dare you call that a joke? Asterisk, even former students, once too afraid to speak, began to break their silence. Anonymous interviews revealed chilling testimonies, whispers of secluded ceremonies. Students led into the woods at night under the guise of punishment. Chants echoing across the grounds, and sightings of cloaked figures blending into the darkness. Some spoke of the Hollow as a legend passed down between dormitories for generations, rumored to be a place where asterisk the bad ones disappeared. Now, with its existence confirmed, the legend felt terrifyingly real. Yet within Gracefield's stone walls, the response was predictably measured and chilling. Father Adrian Vale, confronted by reporters, issued a single, cryptic statement. Asterisk, the woods are old. The land remembers. What you see there is not of our doing. He offered no further elaboration, retreating once again behind the academy's veil of secrecy. For many, this was the breaking point, the moment the public could no longer cling to convenient explanations or dismiss the disappearances as the failures of lost, troubled youth. The discovery of the Hollow transformed lingering unease into full-blown terror. It cemented Gracefield Academy not as a sanctuary for wayward children, but as the epicenter of a mystery steeped in darkness, one that stretched beyond missing persons and into the realm of the unexplainable. The nightmare had escalated, and as investigators packed their gear and the protests grew louder, one chilling truth settled over northern Vermont like the ever-present fog. The Hollow had been found, but the children had not. Gracefield Academy's imposing stone walls and Gothic arches have always projected an image of order, discipline, and religious tradition. But beneath its carefully constructed facade lies a history far older and far darker than most ever realized. The school's troubled legacy cannot be separated from the land it occupies, nor from the centuries of whispers, violence, and secrecy that have saturated these northern Vermont hills. The land Gracefield sits upon was once home to small Abenaki settlements, the indigenous people who lived along Vermont's rivers and forests long before European colonists arrived. But by the mid-1700s, much of this territory had been forcibly seized, cleared, and claimed by Puritan settlers moving north from Massachusetts. Among them was a fringe religious sect known in hushed historical accounts as the Dominion of the Chosen, a radical offshoot of Puritan ideology obsessed with spiritual purity, punishment, and what they called cleansing rituals. Town archives, brittle with age, contained fragmented references to this sect. Farmsteads burned under mysterious circumstances, unmarked graves discovered along forgotten trails, families vanishing after accusations of heresy, though most official records avoid the details. Oral histories passed down among locals speak of harsh ceremonies conducted deep in the woods, rites meant to purge sin from the body, often through violent or deadly means. The land where Gracefield now stands was central to these whispered legends. One particularly disturbing thread connects to the disappearances of indigenous children during the 1800s, a period when conversion schools and forced assimilation programs targeted native communities across New England. Though Vermont largely escaped the large-scale reservation systems seen in other regions, records reveal troubling gaps in census data, unexplained disappearances of Abenaki youth, and reports of children sent to Christian reform institutions that no longer appear on official maps. By the late 19th century, much of this history had been buried beneath the veneer of progress and religious expansion. It was in this context, in 1921, that the Congregation of the Cross founded Gracefield Academy, a Catholic boarding school for so-called wayward youth. The school was promoted as a sanctuary of discipline and moral rehabilitation, but internal records, rarely seen by the public, paint a different picture. Confidential disciplinary logs, recovered by investigative journalists, reveal patterns of severe punishment disguised as spiritual correction. Solitary confinement in stone prayer cells, mandatory fasting, corporal punishment administered under religious pretense, sanctioned by the school's early leadership. More troubling are the cryptic references to cleansing ceremonies held in the school's private chapel, events shrouded in secrecy, with attendance limited to select faculty and students. Photographs from the academy's early years show rigid rows of uniformed children, unsmiling under the watchful gaze of stern priests and nuns. But it's in the backgrounds of these images, the symbols etched into chapel doors, the unfamiliar iconography on ceremonial robes, that echoes of the land's darker past reveal themselves. Scholars studying religious syncretism have noted the eerie parallels between Gracefield's internal rituals and the earlier practices attributed to the Dominion of the Chosen, a continuity of belief in purification through suffering, masked beneath layers of Catholic tradition. For nearly a century, these undercurrents remained hidden, overshadowed by the Academy's reputation and isolation. But as the disappearances escalated in the late 1990s and early 2000s, and with the discovery of the holocomplete with symbols matching both Puritan folklore and modern carvings, the disturbing through line became impossible to ignore. Academy wasn't just built on land haunted by violence and extremism, it was, in many ways, continuing a legacy written in secrecy, ritual, and the blood of the forgotten. On an unwavering obedience. It marketed itself as a final hope for wayward youth, runaways, petty criminals, children too unruly or broken for public schools or foster care. For decades, Gracefield maintained a carefully crafted, image, an austere, religious boarding school nestled in the wilderness, instilling discipline in society's forgotten children. But by the late 1990s, that polished facade was beginning to crack. Whispers emerged of overcrowding, of brutal punishments hidden behind stone walls, of a growing culture of fear among students and staff alike. As enrollment dwindled and oversight faltered, the isolation that once seemed ideal for reform became the perfect cover for something far more sinister. And then the disappearances began. As the disappearances mounted and public outrage intensified, the investigation into Gracefield Academy expanded beyond the borders of Vermont, drawing in law enforcement agencies, independent researchers, and a growing legion of conspiracy theorists. Everyone, it seemed, was seeking the truth. But what they encountered was a labyrinth of contradictions, dead ends, and unsettling coincidences that only deepened the mystery. By late 2000, following the discovery of the hollow, state officials finally requested federal assistance. The FBI's Child Abduction Rapid Deployment Team arrived, bringing forensic experts, behavioral profilers, and specialized investigators to the remote hills surrounding Gracefield. For a brief moment, families of the missing believed justice, or at least answers, might finally be within reach. But despite months of intensive work, the federal investigation soon ground to a halt, stonewalled not by unwillingness, but by a glaring, infuriating reality: a complete lack of hard evidence. Case files, now partially declassified, revealed the staggering complexity investigators faced. There were no clear witnesses, no verifiable leads, no bodies. The fragments of uniforms and rosary beads found in the hollow, while deeply unsettling, could not be definitively linked to foul play. DNA samples were inconclusive, degraded by time and exposure. The bloodstains on the altar, animal in origin, according to forensic labs, though some experts quietly questioned the integrity of those tests. As public trust in official channels eroded, alternative theories blossomed, each more unsettling than the last. Local legends of underground tunnels beneath Gracefield's stone foundation, resurfaced stories of hidden passageways constructed during Prohibition, or even earlier, by Puritan settlers seeking to conceal their own heretical practices. Former students spoke of sealed doors in the basement levels, of cold drafts emanating from behind forgotten walls, of late-night sounds echoing from beneath the floors. Though no formal search ever confirmed the existence of such tunnels, their legend took on a life of its own, feeding the belief that the missing children were hidden, or worse, transported through a subterranean network stretching beneath the academy and into the woods. Another theory pointed inward, toward Gracefield's staff. Some believed a rogue faction within the faculty, a cult operating under the guise of religious discipline, had orchestrated the disappearances as part of archaic rituals or ideological purification. Whispers of cloaked figures, of Sister Miriam, secret ceremonies, of Father Vale's cryptic statements only fueled the suspicion. Investigative journalists unearthed connections between the academy and obscure religious orders known for harsh, esoteric practices, though hard evidence remained elusive. The most harrowing theory, however, revolved around human trafficking. Anonymous sources claimed Gracefield's isolation made it a prime location for exploitation: children deemed troubled or unwanted, vanishing into the underworld of illegal adoption rings, forced labor, or worse. While law enforcement downplayed these claims, citing lack of corroboration, private detectives hired by distraught families pursued this possibility with increasing desperation, tracing false leads and confronting a series of closed doors at every turn amid the tangle of speculation. Psychological experts weighed in on the crisis brewing around Gracefield. Dr. Elaine Rourke, a respected psychiatrist specializing in trauma and institutional abuse, offered perhaps the most grounded, no less chilling assessment of the situation. Gracefield Academy represents the perfect storm for horror, Dr. Rourke explained during a televised interview. case files and timelines spread across the table before her. You have vulnerable children, many from fractured homes or foster care, placed in an isolated, rigid environment with limited oversight. Add to that a legacy of secrecy, religious extremism, and generational rumors of dark practices, and the result is an ecosystem primed for both real harm and the amplification of fear. According to Dr. Rourke, the disappearances in the subsequent folklore surrounding them fed into what psychologists term collective trauma. In such environments, secrecy and suspicion flourish, with each unexplained incident reinforcing the belief that malevolent forces are at work. While this doesn't dismiss the very real tragedies of the missing, it complicates efforts to separate fact from myth, especially when institutional silence leaves a void for speculation to fill. Timeline graphics flash across the screen. Enrollment numbers dwindling, disappearances mapped year by year, patterns forming but never resolved. Investigators charted every known case, every whispered lead, every symbol etched into the academy's stone walls and forest trees. Yet for all their efforts, the data led in circles back to the same conclusions. The missing were gone. The school maintained plausible deniability, and the community's questions remained unanswered. Even the FBI's final report, heavily redacted, could only offer vague assessments, insufficient evidence to pursue criminal charges. Institutional neglect cannot be ruled out. Recommend ongoing monitoring. With that, federal involvement quietly dissipated, leaving families and local authorities to grapple with the haunting vacuum of uncertainty. In the absence of closure, the conspiracy machine roared to life. Online forums exploded with theories, connecting Gracefield to everything from ancient Puritan cults to modern secret societies. Amateur sleuths dissected satellite images, claiming to spot hidden entrances in the surrounding woods. Paranormal investigators flocked to Vermont, drawn by the legends of the Hollow and reports of unexplained phenomena, flickering lights, disembodied voices, sudden, overwhelming feelings of dread near the academy grounds. Yet, despite the noise, no definitive truth emerged. Each theory, whether grounded in historical patterns, whispered in dormitory shadows, or spun from the internet's boundless imagination, seemed simultaneously plausible and impossible to prove. The only constants were the missing children, the eerie silence from Gracefield Academy, and the chilling possibility that the darkest answers lay hidden just beyond reach, beneath layers of stone, tradition, and fear. As the investigation into Gracefield Academy spiraled deeper into chaos, so too did the web of conflicting accounts, misinformation, and deliberate obfuscation that would come to define the case. In the early days following the initial disappearances, it seemed there was hope for clarity. Official timelines were established, witness statements collected, and media outlets pledged to expose the truth. But as the months dragged on and more children vanished, the lines between fact and fiction blurred beyond recognition. Discrepancies in the official record began to surface, almost immediately eroding public trust. Parents of missing students noted glaring inconsistencies in timelines. Some reported being notified of their child's disappearance hours, even days after the last confirmed sighting, contradicting the Academy's claims of immediate response. In several cases, the timestamps on internal reports failed to align with security footage or witness testimonies, raising questions about who knew what and when. Enrollment records, once considered airtight, also came under scrutiny. Journalists investigating the school discovered alterations in student rosters' names missing from certain years, transfer documents mysteriously incomplete, and paperwork that appeared doctored or deliberately vague. The Academy's administration dismissed these discrepancies as clerical errors, but critics saw them as evidence of systemic cover-ups designed to erase the paper trail of the missing. The media, sensing both opportunity and danger, fractured into competing narratives. While reputable outlets attempted measured reporting, tabloids seized the more sensational elements, igniting public hysteria. Headlines blared from newsstands and television screens. Asterisk, satanic school cult, 29 gone without a trace. And asterisk, Vermont's disappearing children's there, a ritual killer on the loose. The imagery was relentless hooded figures, blood-stained altars, haunted forest sand, though not all of it could be substantiated. It fueled the nation's growing obsession with the case. With the feeding frenzy in full swing, self-proclaimed whistleblowers emerged, each offering pieces of a puzzle that only seemed to deepen the mystery. One of the most prominent was Alex Monroe, a former Gracefield student turned internet personality. In grainy video interviews and viral blog posts, Monroe described hidden chambers beneath the Academy underground spaces allegedly used for punishment, rituals, and secret gatherings. His stories were vivid. Cold stone corridors, chanting echoing through vents, and students returning from these chambers, change, quiet, distant, fearful. For a moment, Monroe's claims captivated the public imagination. Conspiracy forums dissected his every word. Amateur investigators flooded the forests around Gracefield, searching for hidden entrances, and the media eagerly amplified his allegations. But as scrutiny intensified, so did the cracks in Monroe's account. Records revealed he had been expelled from Gracefield years prior for disciplinary issues, casting doubt on his credibility. Attempts to verify his claims of underground structures were unsuccessful, and when confronted by reporters about inconsistencies in his story, Monroe recanted portions of his testimony, admitting to exaggerations made for attention. The fallout was swift. Major news outlets distanced themselves, painting Monroe as an opportunist exploiting a tragedy for fame. His confession provided ammunition for the Academy's defenders, who cited his falsehoods as proof that the rumors swirling around Gracefield were the product of mass hysteria, not reality. But for many, Monroe's tarnished credibility didn't erase the nagging feeling that somewhere within his embellished tale lay a kernel of truth. Another fragment lost in the growing storm of misinformation. Meanwhile, key documents tied to the investigation inexplicably vanished. Files submitted to state authorities went missing in transit. Photographs from the Hollow were reported lost due to technical failures. Even internal communications within the Academy appeared scrubbed, with emails and records from crucial dates unrecoverable. Some blamed bureaucratic incompetence, others pointed to deliberate sabotage. Regardless of cause, the missing evidence only further fueled suspicion that someone, whether within Gracefield, local law enforcement, or higher powers, was working to keep the truth buried. As conflicting witness statements piled up, timelines fragmented, and critical documents disappeared, the collective understanding of the case unraveled. Facts became slippery, distorted by fear, grief, and the human need to make sense of the senseless. What was undeniable, however, was that the longer the uncertainty lingered, the more impossible it became to separate truth from fabrication in the void left by reliable information. The mythology surrounding Gracefield Academy flourished, and beneath the surface of recanted testimonies and vanished files, one chilling constant remained. 29 children were still missing, and the Academy's stone walls, steeped in secrecy, remained unbroken, years after the last of the Gracefield disappearances. Long after the news, vans packed up, and the public's attention drifted elsewhere, whispers continued to circulate through the quiet towns of northern Vermont. And then, slowly, cautiously, the buried voices began to emerge, fragments of forgotten testimonies, overlooked details, and hidden witnesses whose accounts painted a far more disturbing picture than anyone had dared to imagine. The first to come forward did so anonymously, a former staff member whose identity remains protected to this day. Through a series of confidential letters sent to investigative journalist Sarah Green, the staffer described an inner circle operating within Gracefield's rigid hierarchy. According to the letters, this wasn't just a group of devout faculty members enforcing strict religious discipline. It was a clandestine society functioning beneath the surface, steeped in ritual, secrecy, and absolute control. They called themselves the Hollow. The staffer wrote in one letter the name, echoing the rumors whispered by students for decades. Not just a place in the woods, it's them, the ones who decide what happens to the students, who stays, who disappears. They believe in cleansing not through reform, but through sacrifice. The letters detailed cryptic meetings held in the Academy's private chapel after curfew, strange symbols carved into stone walls, and the silent, unquestioned authority of certain faculty members, most notably Sister Miriam and Headmaster Father Vale. The staffer claimed that attempts to question or expose these rituals resulted in quiet dismissals or forced resignations, with some former employees simply vanishing from public records altogether. Skeptics dismissed the letters as the work of a disgruntled employee or an opportunist capitalizing on the Academy's infamy. But for others, they were the missing thread connecting the institutional silence to the darker folklore that had surrounded Gracefield for generations. In the years that followed, more testimonies surfaced, first in hushed interviews conducted behind blurred faces and voice distortion, then gradually, with increasing courage, from those willing to stand in the light. Among them was Thomas Avery, a former Gracefield student who, now an adult, broke his silence in a televised exposé. Thomas recounted an event that had haunted him since his early teens, what he referred to as the initiation. His voice, though steady, carried the weight of years spent suppressing the memory. According to his account, select students were chosen for the ritual under the guise of discipline for rebellious behavior. They were blindfolded, led deep into the surrounding woods, and made to kneel in the hollow, where the stone altar still stood beneath the moonlight. There were figures in robes, Thomas recalled, faculty members. Some I recognized, others I never saw around campus. They chanted, something I didn't understand. They carved symbols into the trees, into the ground. They told us it was necessary, that it was part of being redeemed. Thomas claimed he was spared because he obeyed, remained silent, and never spoke of what he witnessed. Others, he believes, weren't so fortunate. His testimony aligned disturbingly well with fragments of previous reports, the same symbols, the same chants, the same eerie connection between the Academy's strict doctrine and the darker forces rumored to linger beneath its surface. But perhaps the most damning revelation came from someone long presumed to have left the investigation behind, a retired detective named Charles Whitaker, one of the original law enforcement officers assigned to the early Gracefield cases. Years after his retirement, Whitaker spoke to documentary filmmakers, revealing suppressed evidence that, in his words, could have changed the entire course of the investigation. He described how, during the early searches, forensic teams discovered more than they publicly admitted: traces of blood inconsistent with animal origin, fragments of children's belongings hidden within the chapel's basement storage, and indications of tampered security footage. Whitaker alleged that higher authorities within both the state police and the religious institutions pressured the investigation to downplay these discoveries, citing insufficient evidence and urging the preservation of the academy's reputation. It wasn't incompetence, Whitaker stated, his face lined with regret. It was intentional. We had leads, real ones. But every time we got close to something, files disappeared, evidence got misplaced, people were reassigned. Whitaker's admissions reignited public outrage, validating the fears that had lingered for decades that the truth about Gracefield Academy had been buried, not by accident, but by design. Together, the anonymous letters, the ex-students' testimony, and the retired detective's suppressed evidence formed a chilling mosaic. The disappearances weren't isolated, nor were they merely the product of urban legend. There was structure, intention, and beneath it all our hidden network of secrecy that thrived within the academy's stone walls. Though official investigations had long since gone cold, the hidden witnesses ensured one thing: the silence surrounding Gracefield was fractured. The buried voices were speaking at last. Their whispers carried the weight of unfinished nightmares, still waiting to be exposed. For years, Gracefield Academy stood as a decaying monument to secrecy, a fortress of stone and stained glass that seemed impervious to investigation. But time has a way of loosening even the tightest grips on buried truths. It wasn't until years after the Academy's official closure that the most chilling details began to surface, not in grand revelations, but in fragments, overlooked pieces hidden in plain sight, waiting to be unearthed. It started during a private restoration project funded by developers with plans to convert the abandoned campus into a historical landmark. Construction crews, tasked with clearing out debris and decaying infrastructure, stumbled upon what investigators had misstored, perhaps what others had deliberately concealed. Beneath the forgotten floorboards of the East Wing dormitory, concealed behind warped wooden planks, workers discovered a series of hidden compartments, carved expertly into the foundation. Inside were objects that turned a simple restoration into a renewed criminal investigation. The compartments contained garments, fragments of the iconic Gracefield uniforms, but stained, torn, and in some cases, unmistakably marked with dark, rust-colored splotches. Forensic teams later confirmed what many already suspected: the stains were blood. Though degraded by time, traces remained, and preliminary testing pointed to a human origin. Yet once again, full DNA identification proved frustratingly inconclusive. The samples were partial, deteriorated, and likely contaminated by years of exposure. Still, their discovery reignited fears long buried, and questions that authorities had spent decades sidestepping. Alongside the garments, investigators found small personal items, shattered rosary beads, frayed notebook pages, and crude hand-drawn sketches done on torn pieces of parchment. The drawings were unmistakably the work of children: rough lines, shaky handwriting, the haunting simplicity of young imaginations attempting to capture something too terrifying to fully understand. One drawing, preserved under plastic, depicted the Hollow, its circular clearing framed by jagged trees, a crude stone altar at its center. Around it, black-robed figures loomed, their hoods featureless, their shapes towering and distorted. Another sketch showed the interior of what resembled the Academy's private chapel. but altered in unsettling ways, the crucifix inverted, strange symbols replacing the stained glass saints, and in the background, faint outlines of robed figures encircling kneeling students. On the edges of the page, scrawled in cramped, hurried writing, were the words, Asterisk, where next? The hollow knows. Asterisk, the discovery of these drawings sent a jolt through the investigative community. For years, officials had dismissed claims of rituals and shadowy ceremonies as student exaggerations, the product of group hysteria or fabricated memory. But these illustrations, dated and hidden with meticulous care, suggested otherwise. They weren't the work of internet conspiracy theorists. They were relics from the Academy's darkest days, visual confessions from those who had lived through the fear. Investigators also uncovered symbols etched into the floorboards and walls surrounding the hidden compartment spirals, inverted crosses and cryptic markings matching those found deep in the hollow and throughout the surrounding woods. These symbols, long dismissed as graffiti, were now understood as part of a broader, more coordinated pattern that stretched across the Academy's grounds. In the weeks following these discoveries, additional forensic teams scoured Gracefield's abandoned halls. Beneath the crumbling foundation of the faculty quarters, ground-penetrating radar detected anomalous hollow spaces where no construction blueprints indicated rooms or tunnels. Though access was limited due to structural instability, what little could be explored revealed more chilling artifacts, ceremonial robes, animal bones arranged in ritualistic patterns, and remnants of candles melted into stone surfaces. Among the recovered evidence was a small, blood-stained garment, believed to be part of a child's uniform shirt. It too underwent DNA testing. Though degraded, analysts confirmed the presence of human genetic material, another link in the chain of disturbing clues, yet another frustratingly incomplete answer. As these details emerged, those long invested in uncovering the Academy's secrets were both vindicated and horrified. Former students recognized the symbols, the patterns, the whispered legends made tangible at last. Journalists reignited their investigations, piecing together timelines that now bore the weight of physical evidence. Families of the missing, though still without closure, clung to these fragments as proof that their fears had been justified all along. Still, the most chilling realization remained. These discoveries hadn't been found by determined investigators. During the height of the case, they had been hidden beneath the feet of students, teachers, and authorities the entire time. Beneath forgotten floorboards, inside sealed walls, buried truths had waited in silence evidence overlooked, or perhaps deliberately concealed by those who once held sway over Gracefield's shadowy operations. The implications were inescapable. Whether by incompetence, fear, or active conspiracy, the investigation into Gracefield had never reached the depths it needed to. And though years had passed, the physical remains of terror persisted a silent, lingering testament to the Academy's dark legacy. As investigators sifted through the newly unearthed evidence, one thing became chillingly clear. The story of Gracefield Academy wasn't over. Its secrets had simply been waiting, hidden beneath layers of stone, wood, and silence. For the moment, they could no longer be ignored. The deeper investigators and researchers delved into the legacy of Gracefield Academy. The more one pattern emerged etched into stone, scribbled onto forgotten pages, carved into the walls of dormitories, and etched into the skin of the surrounding woods. The same markings, repeating, relentless, impossible to ignore. They called it the Hollow's Sigil, a symbol whose design wove through centuries of dark history, Like a malignant thread, the sigil itself was deceptively simple to the untrained ojar spiral descending inward, coiled tightly at its core, surrounded by intersecting lines that formed an almost organic, root-like structure branching outward. But as experts from the fields of symbology, religious history, and esoteric studies began analyzing its shape, it became clear that this design carried a weight far beyond modern graffiti or adolescent superstition. Through archived photographs, recovered artifacts, and decrypted fragments of confiscated student journals, researchers traced the origins of the hollow sigil back to the 17th centuries, specifically to obscure, fringe religious sects that splintered from Puritan settlements across New England. Among the most troubling connections was the group known in fragmented records as the Dominion of the Chosen, an extremist order believed to have blended Puritan severity with esoteric rituals focused on purification, sacrifice, and transcendence. Esoteric scholars noted eerie similarities between the Gracefield symbols and those found in historical texts attributed to the Dominion, particularly in faded pages referencing the path of absence, a supposed spiritual doctrine promoting the belief that enlightenment and even ascension could only be achieved through the deliberate erasure of one's physical presence. To the uninitiated, the teachings sounded like theological metaphor, but to those studying the Gracefield case, the parallels with real-world disappearances were impossible to overlook. Within the academy itself, the hollow sigil appeared with alarming frequency once people knew where to look. During the latest forensic searches, investigators found the symbol subtly etched onto the chapel's stone pillars, hidden in corners shadowed by decades of dust and decay. Its spiral design was scratched into the underside of dormitory beds, carved into tree trunks along the forest's edge, and painted faintly beneath layers of chipped varnish in administrative offices. But the most disturbing manifestation came in the form of hidden books recovered from the chapels, locked archives, handwritten tomes, bound in weathered leather, their pages filled with cryptic illustrations and fragmented prayers. Some pages contained ritual instructions written in Latin and Old English, their translations hinting at ceremonies centered around removal, cleansing, and the hollowing. Scholars and linguists collaborated to decipher these texts, uncovering a repeating phrase buried among the esoteric rhetoric: asterisk through absence, we ascend. Asterisk, the phrase appeared dozens of times, scrawled on parchment margins, woven into ritual. Diagrams even painted faintly across the walls of the hollow itself, when infrared photography was applied to old images of the clearing. It became clear that, to the order operating in the shadows of Gracefield, absence was not merely a disappearance, it was a transformation, a grotesque step toward what they believed to be spiritual elevation. This revelation sparked renewed theories among investigators and cultural historians alike. If the group known as the Hollow within the Academy subscribed to this twisted doctrine, the disappearances of students weren't random acts of violence or neglect. They were deliberate, ritualized, and framed as sacrifices disguised as redemption. The unsettling convergence of historical symbols, recovered texts, and cryptic phrases painted a portrait of Gracefield Academy, not as an isolated institution, but as the modern incarnation of a centuries-old ideology rooted in secrecy, ritual, and the belief that transcendence demanded erasure from the physical world. Though not every symbol or cryptic phrase could be fully decoded, one message resonated above the rest. The missing children were never simply lost. They were taken, absorbed into a belief system that masked itself in tradition, discipline, and the suffocating silence of institutional power. The sigil, the spiral leading inward, the hidden books, the phrase. Etched in every dark corner together, they told a story far older and more terrifying than anyone wanted to believe. And, as investigators pieced together the fragments, the grim realization emerged. Wherever the hollow left its mark, absence followed, and from absence, something darker ascended beneath the surface of the Gracefield Academy mystery. Disappearances, the rituals, the cryptic symbols, lies a deeper, more insidious layer of understanding. The psychological machinery that allowed such darkness to flourish unchecked. Experts in trauma, cult psychology, and institutional abuse have long warned of the conditions that can transform isolated environments into breeding grounds for manipulation and control. And according to many of them, Gracefield Academy embodied that environment perfectly. Dr. Elaine Rourke, a forensic psychologist specializing in coercive groups and closed communities, describes Gracefield as the textbook crucible for manipulation. Her assessment is grounded in years of research into how isolated institutions, especially those cloaked in religious or moral authority, can reshape vulnerable individuals through subtle and, often devastating means. Control, isolation, obedience, these are the cornerstones of environments where manipulation becomes not only possible but inevitable. Rourke explains in an interview, seated in front of psychological diagrams illustrating the stages of indoctrination. At Gracefield, you had young people, most already marginalized foster children, court-ordered placements, kids labeled as troubled. You place them in an isolated, authoritarian structure. You strip away their external support systems. You enforce rigid hierarchies of power. That's the foundation for trauma bonding and psychological conditioning. The concept of trauma bonding, Rourke notes, is central to understanding how such a system could operate for years without open rebellion or exposure. In simple terms, trauma bonding occurs when individuals develop psychological attachments to their abusers or oppressive environments, often as a survival mechanism. Fear, intermittent reinforcement, and the promise of belonging intertwine, fostering dependency even in the face of abuse. Within Gracefield's stone walls, former students describe an atmosphere saturated with fear and ambiguity. Strict punishments, surveillance, and isolation were common. Yet moments of approval or kindness, however fleeting, were strategically administered, reinforcing a dangerous cycle. Those deemed obedient received small privileges, fostering loyalty to the very system that oppressed them. Those who resisted were ostracized, punished, or more ominously vanished. Dr. Samuel Grayson, a sociologist who has studied religious cult dynamics for over 2 decades, draws unsettling parallels between Gracefield's structure and known cult methodologies. We often think of cults as groups existing on society's fringes, but many operate within institutions we perceive as legitimate: schools, churches, even therapeutic programs, Grayson explains. What defines them is the manipulation of belief, identity, and behavior under the guise of moral or spiritual development. Grayson points to reports from former students and hidden witnesses describing rituals, secret punishments, and the overarching belief that Gracefield offered redemption through discipline. This language, he argues, mirrors the indoctrination techniques used by high-control groups, redefining suffering as purification, fostering an us versus them mentality, and elevating charismatic authority figures as unquestionable leaders. At Gracefield, that authority manifested most notably in figures like Headmaster Father Adrian Vale and Sister Miriam, leaders whose reputations among students ranged from revered to feared. Former students recall Father Vale's sermon's warning of the consequences of straying, often delivered with veiled references to those who had disappeared. Sister Miriam, meanwhile, was rumored to oversee more clandestine forms of correction rituals conducted away from the public eye, justified as spiritual necessity. In such environments, experts explain, vulnerable youth already primed by unstable backgrounds or previous trauma become easily shaped by charismatic authority. They are taught to distrust outsiders, suppress critical thinking, and internalize the belief that their only value lies in submission to the institution's doctrine. Moreover, the isolation of Gracefield's location played a critical role in sustaining control. Nestled deep in Vermont's forests, far from urban oversight, the academy functioned as a closed system. External interference was minimal. An escape, whether physical or psychological, was nearly impossible for the students confined within its stone walls. Dr. Rourke elaborates on the psychological consequences of such isolation. When your entire world shrinks to the boundaries of an institution, your frame of reality becomes malleable, she explains. You begin to accept the unacceptable, normalize fear, and adopt the belief systems of those in power because to do otherwise means risking alienation, punishment, or worse. The most chilling element, according to Rourke and Grayson, is how these dynamics may have concealed the darker activities alleged to have occurred at Gracefield. The disappearances, the symbols, the hidden rituals all could be veiled beneath layers of psychological conditioning, with students too afraid or indoctrinated to resist, and faculty either complicit or equally ensnared by the institution's twisted culture. As more former students broke their silence, patterns consistent with institutional abuse became evident. Survivors described chronic anxiety, dissociation, and fractured memories, hallmarks of trauma experienced within closed, oppressive systems. Some recounted being punished for questioning authority, others for merely expressing fear, and always, lingering in the background, was the pervasive presence of the hollow both as a physical place and as an ideological construct promoting the belief that disappearance equated to transcendence. Experts caution that environments like Gracefield don't require overt violence to inflict harm. Psychological manipulation alone can devastate individuals, eroding their autonomy, sense of reality, and ultimately their capacity to seek help. In extreme cases, as some suspect occurred at Gracefield, these systems can escalate into ritual abuse, exploitation, or human disappearance cloaked beneath layers of doctrine, tradition, and institutional silence. For investigators and psychologists alike, the Gracefield case remains a haunting reminder of how easily control, isolation, and obedience can spiral into systemic horror. It underscores the importance of vigilance, transparency, and safeguarding vulnerable populations, especially within isolated institutions wielding unchecked power. As Dr. Grayson reflects, Gracefield didn't become a crucible for manipulation overnight. It evolved slowly, methodically behind the guise of structure and moral development. And by the time the truth began to surface, the damage had been done, leaving behind trauma, missing children, and a legacy steeped in fear. Piece by piece, fragment by fragment, the chaotic puzzle of Gracefield Academy's dark legacy has slowly begun to reform. Years of hidden testimonies, unearthed evidence, and overlooked records have allowed investigators, historians, and independent researchers to reconstruct a haunting timeline, one that reveals patterns far too deliberate to ignore and connections long buried beneath layers of secrecy It begins in the fall of 1998, when Emily Harper, age 13, becomes the first publicly acknowledged disappearance connected to Gracefield. Emily, described as quiet but defiant, had been assigned to after-school detention for violating curfew. Her last confirmed sighting was near the Academy's private chapel, where she was reportedly seen cleaning under supervision. Hours later, she failed to return to the dormitories. The Academy initially dismissed concerns, suggesting Emily had run away, a claim the authorities reluctantly echoed due to her status as a foster youth with a history of behavioral issues. No formal search was initiated until days later, by which time Emily had vanished without a trace. In the months that followed, rumors among students grew louder. Whispers of the hollow, of strange symbols carved into dormitory walls, and of hooded figures seen near the forest's edge circulated in hushed tones. But it wasn't until the spring of 1999 that those whispers turned into panic. Marcus Bell, a 15-year-old student from a court-mandated placement program, vanished during a supervised weekend hiking trip into the dense woods surrounding the Gracefield. His group reported him missing after he strayed from the designated path. Despite extensive searches, only Marcus's rosary, a worn, blood-stained artifact, was ever recovered, discovered near a clearing now infamous as the Hollow. Authorities again leaned toward the runaway narrative, though privately, staff and students exchanged fearful glances, recalling the same clearing referenced in whispered stories of rituals and disappearances. The timeline accelerates after Marcus's case. In late 1999, Sofia Alvarez, 12 years old, disappears from her dormitory bed. Her belongings remain untouched, and no sign of forced entry is found. Students report hearing faint chanting echoing from the chapel that night, though the administration dismisses these accounts as hysteria. From this point onward, the pattern solidifies. Each disappearance occurs near the Academy's most secluded locations: the chapel, the dense forest trails, or the overgrown perimeter surrounding the Hollow. By the year 2000, the disappearances escalate, for more students vanish, all under similarly ambiguous circumstances, their last known locations tracing back to either the woods or the Academy's spiritual facilities. During this period, a disturbing pattern emerges. Many of the disappearances coincide with specific lunar events, particularly the new moon and certain full moons, both dates traditionally linked to historical occult practices and purification rituals. In October 2000, the investigation reaches a turning point with the discovery of the Hollow, a remote forest clearing containing a stone altar, cryptic blood-stained symbols, and remnants of uniforms linked to the missing students. This discovery, while shocking, fails to produce concrete leads, and authorities publicly dismiss it as an elaborate hoax or deranged prank, further fueling community outrage and suspicion. Between 2001 and 2002, the remaining disappearances continue, bringing the total to 29 missing students over a 4-year period. Despite increased media scrutiny, protests, and intermittent law enforcement involvement, including a brief FBI investigation, the case remains stagnant. All documented last sightings of the missing align with the same pattern: proximity to the chapel, the forest's edge, or locations marked with the Hollow's cryptic sigil. Further analysis of the reconstructed timeline reveals another chilling consistency. The disappearances align almost perfectly with what investigators now believe were clandestine Hollow ceremonies, their timing meticulously calculated to coincide with both lunar cycles and religious calendar events. including feast days historically associated with penance and spiritual cleansing. Forensic review of archival materials, including confiscated journals, hidden chapel records, and decoded drawings, corroborates this connection, revealing references to the path of absence, ritual dates marked alongside moon phases, and ominous phrases such as asterisk through absence, we ascend. These details, though fragmented, paint a picture of systemic, ritualistic disappearances masked beneath the institution. Essay a steady exterior of the final documented case, occurring in late 2002, mirrors the others in its eerie precision. Daniel Rhodes vanishes after being summoned for a disciplinary meeting with Sister Miriam in the chapel's lower chambers. His belongings are later discovered untouched in his dormitory, but Daniel is never seen again. His disappearance marks the final known incident before Gracefield's abrupt closure in 2003, prompted by mounting legal pressure, public scandal, and irreparable reputational damage. The reconstructed timeline not only exposes the pattern of disappearances but also underscores the Academy's consistent proximity to each incident. The alignment of these tragedies with lunar and ritual events, and the disturbing lack of transparency from both the administration and surrounding authorities. Every missing child, every whispered ceremony, every etched sigil circles back to the same locations: the chapel, the forest, and the hollow, forming an interconnected web of fear, silence, and deliberate erasure. In the years since, despite ongoing independent investigations, no bodies have been recovered, no arrests made, and no conclusive resolution reached. But the timeline stands as a chilling testament to the calculated nature of the disappearances, suggesting a dark orchestration hidden beneath the Academy's crumbling facade puzzle that, though incomplete, reveals far more than the silence ever could. The closure of Gracefield Academy in 2003 marked the official end of one of the most disturbing chapters in Vermont's modern history, but for those who lived through its horrors, the final bell brought no relief, only silence and unanswered questions that continue to fester like open wounds. The Academy's imposing stone facade, once a symbol of strict tradition and redemption for wayward youth, now stands in ruin, its windows shattered, its chapel doors rotting on their hinges, ivy consuming the dormitories where so many nightmares took root. But while the grounds have decayed, the scars left behind remain raw, stitched into the lives of families, survivors, and an entire community unable to outrun the Academy's shadow. For the parents of the missing, time has not dulled the ache of absence. Their grief is etched into faded photographs taped to telephone poles, yellowed missing persons posters peeling from bulletin boards, and candlelit vigils held long after the search parties disbanded. Many remain trapped in a cruel limbo without answers, without closure, forced to live each day under the crushing weight of not knowing. Some still leave flowers outside the Academy's rusted gates, their hope fragile yet persistent. Others, consumed by loss and unanswered questions, have retreated entirely, their lives fractured beyond repair. The survivors, those who escaped Gracefield's grip but could not escape its psychological hold, carry their trauma quietly, often unseen but never absent. Interviews with former students reveal a mosaic of lasting damage: chronic nightmares, anxiety disorders, fractured memories, and deep-rooted trust issues. For them, the Academy is never truly abandoned. Its lessons rooted in fear, control, and indoctrination in their lives, relationships, and sense of self. It doesn't end when you leave those walls, says Thomas Avery, a former student who broke his silence years after the Academy's closure. You carry it. The rituals, the fear, the way they made you believe disappearing was just part of it. You never stop hearing the whispers. The physical site of Gracefield, now fenced off and posted with no trespassing signs, has become a macabre landmark for thrill-seekers and urban explorers drawn by the chilling legends that cling to its overgrown grounds. Despite warnings, they come armed with flashlights and cameras searching for evidence of the hollow, for hidden symbols, for the lingering traces of the Academy's dark history. Many leave with unsettling stories, flickering lights seen through chapel windows, disembodied whispers drifting through the trees, shadowed figures lurking along forgotten trails. Some report electronic devices failing inexplicably within the walls. Others speak of sudden, overwhelming feelings of dread near the old altar sites. While skeptics dismiss these accounts as the product of folklore and suggestion, they mirror the same details whispered by students decades earlier, the same strange lights, the same voices in the dark, the same oppressive atmosphere. For locals, the abandoned campus has become a place of quiet fear. Town residents, once reluctant to believe the rumors, now avoid the Academy grounds altogether. Hunters bypass the surrounding forest, hikers reroute their trails, and older generations warn children never to stray too close. The lingering questions surrounding Gracefield refuse to fade, even as the buildings crumble. Official investigations, despite sporadic reopenings of the case, have yielded no conclusive answers. The hidden compartments, blood-stained garments, cryptic symbols, and unsettling drawings, while damning in implication, have yet to produce definitive evidence, bodies, or legally actionable conclusions. The Academy's administration, most notably the enigmatic father Adrian Vale and sister Miriam, vanished from public life following the closure. Their whereabouts remain unknown, and their silence continues to fuel conspiracy theories of cover-ups, clandestine networks, and a broader system of complicity that extends far beyond Gracefield's gates. The question of the hollow, both as a physical location and a conceptual entity, remains one of the most enduring mysteries. Was it merely a clearing in the woods used by misguided zealots for rituals? Or was it something older, something woven into the land's dark history of indigenous disappearances, Puritan extremism, and whispered legends of sacrifice and ascension? Despite forensic teams combing the forest repeatedly, no concrete answers have emerged, only more symbols, more scars carved into tree trunks, more chilling graffiti left by unknown hands. Even now, 2 decades later, the case remains a festering wound on the region's conscience, a reminder of how easily isolation, authority, and secrecy can spiral into tragedy. And while Gracefield's stone walls crumble beneath the weight of time and neglect, the Academy's legacy persists in the unanswered questions that refuse to die. What really happened to the 29 missing children? Who orchestrated their disappearances? How deep did the rituals of the hollow truly run? And most hauntingly of all, was it ever truly over? As dusk settles over the ruins, and the wind carries faint echoes of laughter, whispers, and forgotten prayers, the scars of Gracefield Academy endure, not only in broken stone, but in broken lives, unanswered grief, and the creeping suspicion that some truths were never meant to be unearthed. What remains, after all the years of investigation, after the discoveries of hidden evidence, buried testimonies, and chilling artifacts, are theories. The hard facts surrounding Gracefield Academy, the 29 vanished children, the symbols etched in stone, The whispers of rituals and secrecy have created a fragmented, incomplete narrative. But the missing pieces have invited rampant speculation, evolving over the decades into a tangled web of competing theories, none proven, none entirely dismissed. To this day, experts, survivors, journalists, and conspiracy theorists circle the same grim puzzle, debating the possible truths behind Gracefield's haunting legacy. The most persistent and, in many ways, the most plausible theory centers around the existence of a rogue religious cult operating within the Academy itself. This belief draws heavily from the historical evidence unearthed, the Hollow's sigil traced back to 17th century esoteric orders, the recovered chapel books detailing cleansing rituals, and eyewitness accounts of secret ceremonies and punishments that went far beyond disciplinary norms. According to this theory, Gracefield's leadership, particularly figures like Father Adrian Vale and Sister Miriam, were not merely strict educators, but architects of an insidious, cult-like system hidden beneath the veneer of religious education. Supporters of this theory point to the recovered drawings, the blood-stained garments, and the discovered altar within the Hollow as irrefutable proof that a clandestine group existed, adhering to a doctrine that demanded sacrifice, secrecy, and spiritual ascension through absence. The Academy's isolated location, lack of oversight, and history of harsh, authoritarian rule created fertile ground for such a group to operate with impunity. Former students' testimonies, though fragmented by trauma, consistently reference ritual-like punishments, cryptic teachings, and an atmosphere thick with fear and manipulation, hallmarks of cult indoctrination, according to psychological experts. But while the rogue cult theory provides a structured explanation for the disappearances, it fails to account for all anomalies. Some investigators, particularly those specializing in organized crime, propose a more grounded, albeit equally disturbing, possibility: human trafficking. According to this theory, the disappearances were not ritual sacrifices, but orchestrated abductions concealed behind the Academy's rigid religious facade. The idea suggests that Gracefield, with its intake of vulnerable, often marginalized children, many from foster care, the court system, or troubled family situations, became a prime target for exploitation. Proponents argue that the confusing enrollment records, missing documents, and administrative stonewalling weren't signs of ancient cultism but of calculated logistical concealment. The remote setting allowed for easy extraction of victims, while the Academy's rigid control over communication prevented timely outside intervention. The blood evidence and uniforms discovered years later could, under this lens, be remnants of staged disappearances designed to confuse investigations and fuel sensational rumors that distracted from the real crime: trafficking. This theory gained traction after whistleblowers alluded to suppressed evidence and higher-level cover-ups, hinting that the scandal extended beyond Gracefield's walls, possibly implicating law enforcement, religious authorities, or political figures with vested interests in burying the truth. However, the trafficking explanation, while chillingly plausible, lacks direct evidence. No trafficking network has ever been definitively linked to Gracefield, and the ritualistic elements of the case remain difficult to reconcile with purely criminal motivations. A third, more divisive theory emerges from the psychological angle: mass psychosis, amplified by institutional control and trauma-induced hysteria. According to this perspective, the disappearances, while real, were enveloped in a fog of exaggerated fear, memory distortion, and group delusion. Experts in mass psychological phenomena argue that the isolation, strict discipline, and religious extremism at Gracefield created an environment ripe for moral panic. In such settings, rumors morph into shared hallucinations, symbols acquire outsized meaning, and vulnerable youth, primed by trauma, internalize and propagate myths of rituals, shadowy cults, and unseen threats. Supporters of this theory often point to discrepancies in witness accounts, the lack of physical bodies, and the psychological profile of survivors, many of whom struggle with fragmented, inconsistent memories, common in trauma-related dissociation. They suggest that while abuse and neglect likely occurred, the grander narrative of a hidden society and ritualistic disappearances was part constructed by the students' fractured perceptions, amplified by media sensationalism and community fear. Yet, critics of the mass psychosis explanation argue that it fails to address the undeniable physical evidence, the recovered blood-stained garments, the hidden compartments, the etched symbols aligning with centuries-old esoteric groups. To them, dismissing the students' accounts as hysteria perpetuates the very silencing that allowed the disappearances to persist. Beyond these grounded theories lies the most controversial, yet stubbornly persistent, possibility that something otherworldly occurred at Gracefield. Paranormal investigators, occult historians, and fringe theorists point to the eerie alignment of the disappearances with lunar cycles. The historical accounts of indigenous children vanishing from the same land in the 1800s, and the unexplainable reports of strange lights, disembodied whispers, and shadowy figures seen around the abandoned campus to suggest a supernatural component. Some believe the hollow is more than a locational threshold between worlds, rooted in the region's ancient folklore of thin places where the veil separating reality and the unknown wears thin. Others propose that Gracefield was cursed, built atop land steeped in blood and spiritual unrest, its foundations rotting with centuries of unacknowledged horrors. While mainstream investigators largely reject these paranormal theories as speculative, the persistent, unexplainable phenomena surrounding Gracefield electronic failures, sightings of hooded figures long after the academy's closure, the oppressive atmosphere reported by trespassers continue to fuel public fascination and dread. No theory stands uncontested. The rogue cult explanation offers a structured, historical narrative but lacks definitive accountability. The trafficking theory provides a chillingly pragmatic answer but is undercut by missing links. The mass psychosis angle explains psychological fragmentation but disregards tangible evidence. And the supernatural possibility, while seductive to the imagination, remains unverifiable. What is undeniable is the enduring sense of dread that clings to the ruins of Gracefield Academy. It is a place where facts dissolve into folklore, where every recovered artifact deepens the mystery rather than resolves it, and where silence, whether enforced by human hands or by something older and unseen, reigns supreme. In the end, consensus remains elusive. The families grieve, the survivors struggle to heal, and the investigators, both professional and amateur, circle the same unanswered questions year after year. Theories abound, debates continue, but closure remains out of reach. Only dread lingers, heavy as fog over the Vermont hills, whispering that some truths, whether human, psychological, or otherworldly, may never fully surface. Gracefield Academy stands as a decaying monument to that uncertainty, its stone walls eroding, but its shadows enduring. The nightmare of Gracefield Academy's 29 vanished children, whispers of rituals, and decades of unanswered questions is not an isolated tragedy. As investigators and researchers delved deeper into the Academy's dark legacy, it became impossible to ignore an unsettling truth. Similar incidents, threaded with the same themes of isolation, secrecy, and vanished youth, echo across the globe. Though different in geography and cultural context, these parallel cases reveal hauntingly familiar patterns: forgotten institutions cloaked in authority, hidden abuses operating in plain sight, and communities left shattered by the disappearance of their most vulnerable. Perhaps the most sobering parallel lies just across the northern border, within Canada's deeply troubling history of residential schools. For over a century, thousands of Indigenous children were forcibly removed from their families and placed into state and church-run boarding schools, designed to assimilate them into Western culture. Behind the rhetoric of education and redemption, these schools became hotbeds for abuse, neglect, and tragedy. Over recent decades, mass graves have been unearthed near several former school sites, revealing the scale of the atrocities: hundreds of unmarked graves, countless missing children, and generations of families left with no answers. While the circumstances differed, the Canadian system was state-endorsed, rooted in cultural erasure rather than esoteric rituals. The common threads of institutional secrecy, isolation, and the systematic disappearance of vulnerable youth are impossible to dismiss. Survivors' accounts of strict discipline, psychological manipulation, and unexplained vanishings mirror aspects of the Gracefield narrative, underscoring how isolated, unaccountable environments can foster both abuse and silence. The same patterns emerge when examining Chile's infamous Colonia Dignidad, a secretive, cult-like settlement founded in the 1960s by former Nazi Paul Schaefer. What began as an alleged utopian community quickly devolved into a fortress of horror. Closed, heavily guarded compound where abuse, mind control, and disappearances became routine. Children were indoctrinated, families separated, and dissent crushed beneath the guise of spiritual and moral authority. In later years, investigations revealed connections between the colony and human rights violations, including collaboration with Chile's Pinochet regime. Colonia Dignidad embodies many of the same psychological and structural mechanisms seen at Gracefield Academy: charismatic leadership wielding religious doctrine as a tool of control, physical isolation shielding criminal acts from scrutiny, and the deliberate erasure of individuals deemed expendable. Though the Chilean case operated on a larger geopolitical scale, the core elements of secrecy, exploitation, and missing persons resonate with Gracefield's smaller yet equally disturbing tragedy, even beyond North and South America. Similar incidents surface. In the United Kingdom, the Borstal reform schools of the 20th century were plagued by allegations of abuse, disappearances, and unexplained deaths, particularly among marginalized and troubled youth consigned to isolated educational or correctional institutions. In Australia, the forced relocation of Aboriginal children, known as the Stolen Generations, created a system where young lives vanished into bureaucratic shadows, many never to be seen again. These cases, scattered across continents and eras, share a troubling blueprint: institutions designed to fix or redeem. Vulnerable populations become enclaves of unchecked power, shielded by geography, societal stigma, or religious justification. Children, stripped of external support and silenced by fear, disappear, whether into the ground, into trafficking networks, or into untraceable gaps in the record. Communities, confronted with loss, are left grappling with grief, anger, and the paralyzing uncertainty of unresolved trauma. for investigators piecing together the fragmented history of Gracefield Academy. These global echoes serve as both a cautionary tale and a grim validation. The patterns seen within the Academy's stone walls' ritualistic language, disappearances coinciding with institutional ceremonies, psychological manipulation under the guise of education fit within a broader, global phenomenon where secrecy breeds suffering and vulnerable lives slip through the cracks. Experts warn that these parallels are not coincidences, but symptoms of systemic failures when institutions isolate themselves from oversight, when doctrine, religious, political, or moralists allow to override basic human rights, when communities are taught to distrust victims and question survivors. The conditions for disappearance and exploitation flourish. Gracefield may be a uniquely American iteration of this tragedy, but its underlying mechanisms, control, indoctrination, erasure, disturbingly universal. Even as forensic teams comb the Vermont woods, as families of the missing cling to hope, and as trespassers report flickering lights in the Academy's ruins, the shadow of Gracefield stretches far beyond its decaying walls. From the forests of Canada to the compounds of Chile, from the deserts of Australia to the isolated reformatories of Britain, the same whispers persist. Children missing, records altered, rituals hidden behind authority, and a world to will in, to look away until the graves are unearthed, until the evidence is undeniable. Gracefield's nightmare echoes worldwide. It is a chilling reminder that the Academy's scars are not isolated, and its unanswered questions resonate across borders and generations. The missing of Gracefield are part of a far larger, far darker story, one still being written, one still demanding answers, as the sun sinks behind the jagged silhouette of Gracefield Academy's decaying ruins. The last rays of light stain the clouds a bruised crimson, casting long shadows across the overgrown grounds. The chapel's crumbling steeple leans as if exhausted by the weight of unanswered prayers. Ivy claws up the stone walls, devouring what remains of the once imposing facade. Nature reclaims the land, but the scars lingered not just into the earth, but into memory, into history, into the families and lives shattered by what happened here, or what was allowed to happen. 20-9 children gone. No arrests, no confessions, no justice, only their faces frozen on missing posters, their names etched into the granite of memorial plaques, their stories fragmented into rumor, fear, and institutional silence. Their absence hangs in the air like fog that never lifts a hollow space where answers should be, where accountability should stand, but instead, there is only the relentless ache of not knowing. The hollow, the clearing deep in the woods, the whispered legend passed from terrified student to terrified student. The spiral sigil etched into the Academy's stones still haunts the collective imagination. Its symbols, its rituals, its origins lost in layers of history, remain as potent and unresolved as the day the last child vanished. Despite the Academy's closure, despite the investigations, the forensic teams, the documentaries, and the endless speculation, the hollow still whispers. At night, when the wind slides through the empty corridors, when trespassers wander too close, when old fears stir, the same question returns. What truly happened here? The official records offer no comfort. Theories stack upon theories. Cults, trafficking rings, mass hysteria, ancient curses, but consensus remains elusive. Survivors struggle to reconcile fragmented memories with the harsh skepticism of the outside world. Families age, some pass away, never knowing what became of their sons. Their daughters, their faces preserved forever at the age they disappeared. Others still wait, clinging to hope against the gravity of years, desperate for closure, for even the smallest piece of truth to surface. But the silence surrounding Gracefield has proven resilient. Documents missing, witnesses recanting, evidence conveniently lost or dismissed as circumstantial. For every answer unearthed, more questions sprout in its place, like the weeds choking the abandoned dormitories. Who protected those responsible? How deep did the complicity run? Was this the work of a rogue Fuhrer, the symptom of a much larger, more insidious system that thrives in shadows? Perhaps the most chilling realization is how easily it all could happen again. The architecture of horror remains, isolated institutions tucked away from public scrutiny, vulnerable youth shuffled into unfamiliar environments, charismatic authority, figures wielding unchecked power under the guise of discipline, redemption, or faith. The same conditions that allowed Gracefield's nightmare to unfold still exist in forgotten corners, behind closed gates, beneath polished reputations. And so, we are left to remember and to wonder. The Hollow may have faded from headlines, its overgrown trails now silent, but its story is not finished. Its legacy lingers in every missing poster fluttering on forgotten walls, in every whispered rumor of strange lights drifting through the trees, in every broken family still searching, still mourning, still demanding answers. What horrors still hide in the Hollow? What truths rot beneath the Academy's cracked foundation? Will we ever know, or will the weight of silence, the machinery of secrecy, and the human impulse to look away continue to bury the past deeper until it is lost entirely? As dusk settles and the last light dies behind Gracefield's ruins, the questions remain. So does the dread, and somewhere, just beyond, the tree line, the Hollow still whispers, fade to black,